I see this question all the time in comment sections and on Reddit. How do I make a build in the Division 2? Usually the response I see is just someone throwing a build at them. Sometimes those builds are good, sometimes they're not. Even in the comment sections of build videos that showcase very good builds, there is inevitably someone asking, "This build just doesn't work for me. How can I change it to make it work?" Well, today we're going to answer these questions with a simple 4-step process to elevate your builds and dominate the battlefield. With this method, you'll be able to quickly piece together your own build and give you a framework for ongoing changes as your play evolves. Let's get stuck into it. Agents, welcome to your annual Shade training module on how to make your own build. This training is for Shade agents only. That hyena you're shagging, they might be a crazy lay, but they're not trustworthy. Do not share these training materials with any non-Shade agents. Today we'll be training on the Dispatch Build Making Method, or DBMM. As we break down this method, write your questions and critiques in the comments below, as well as any differences between this method and your own. Let's get stuck into it. First, we're going to tackle the method. Then we'll show some worked examples and how they generate builds that I've published before on this channel. After that, we'll go into specifics on the stats that you'll want and pieces you can insert that synergize with those specific types of builds. And finally, we'll talk about how to take existing builds and easily tune them to fit your needs. This method has 4 steps. First, we make the build outline using a flowchart. This ensures we stay focused on what our build is actually supposed to do so we do it effectively. Second, we identify the engagement ranges to ensure we have the proper weapon and identify other considerations for the exact balance of how our build is going to be put together. Third, we choose the exact pieces for our build utilizing the most efficient pieces as I will outline. Fourth, we test the build in-game and then refine it by changing how we play or the pieces we use. So, step 1. Use the flowchart to outline the build. For all you business types, no, I did not use the proper flowchart symbols because I didn't like how the words weren't fitting nicely inside them and I didn't want to make the symbols huge. Deal with it. So at the top is the main question we have to ask ourselves every time we make a build. What is our role? Most groups need one healer or one crowd control player, and the rest of the players can go do damage. There are some groups that can just have all damage players, but once we start doing legendary, that'll be a struggle for a lot of groups. Most groups need a crowd control or healer player to keep the rest of the team alive. Which brings me to my next point. If we're running solo, we'll always need to pick the damage role because we need to kill the enemy, and there's no one else to do it. Oftentimes, however, it can be hard to stay alive with just damage when running solo. There are some builds that can do it, like glass cannon builds that rely on killing the enemy before they damage us, or one-shot sniper builds that have such a fast TTK that we shouldn't take any damage. These builds can get by with armor kits and revive hives. However, most players and builds require a bit of a hybrid to stay alive when running solo. If we're doing a hybrid, we can pick 2 roles, but we don't want to pick any more than that, or we'll be spread too thin. Hybrids are usable in group play as well, but oftentimes we're best with doing our role to the best of our ability so as not to be a burden on our teammates. Step 2 is to decide how close we want to play to the enemy, and this will determine our weapon choices and to some extent tailor the other parts of our build. When we're close to the enemy, we can use weapons with shorter optimal ranges or worse handling. But this comes with the trade-off that we are in more danger. So we want more repairs, crowd control, or effective health pool to deal with that and stay alive. Effective health pool is the term I use to account for not just our armor and health, but also shield health, decoy health, and damage mitigation. We'll see an example of this in a minute. Step 3 is to choose efficient pieces to fill out the build and match up the pieces with what we decided during our build flowchart in step 1. I've laid these all out in a spreadsheet to show what goes with what. I chose some of the most efficient talents and stats that fit within each category. To see every gear set and talent in the game, good references are the gear attribute sheet that I've linked below, as well as the build station tool. You can also look in-game, but you'll only be able to look at the gear pieces you have, and not the ones that you don't, whereas these external sources can show you everything. One important thing that's not shown on this chart. Often the most efficient weapon talents are almost always damage related. I talked about these in my best weapon talents video. See that in the description. Here's an extra bonus step. Taking in advanced customizations. I've laid out 2 examples of this, but there can be even more. This is when agents really stretch their knowledge of the game to find interesting ways for their build to shine. In Countdown and Climax missions, almost every enemy is an elite, so protection from elites is extremely efficient. The preponderance of elites also means that we can get very good mileage out of damage to armor from something like shotguns or the contractor's gloves. Step 4 is test and refine. We want to run the build in-game and see how it performs. But we can't just stop there. I've seen it over and over on Reddit. Someone posts a build and it gets critiqued. The poster gets all flustered and ends up falling back on the refrain, "It works for me." There are a lot of builds that work in the division, but that doesn't mean they can't improve. We can use these questions as a guide to critically think about our build, then try tuning it, and then test it again. Let's step through some examples of builds that I've done on this channel that show stepping through the 4 steps of this method. First is a solo DPS tank hybrid build. This is my filthy casual build, which was the basis for my last video. As we can see, it's a solo build, so we need damage. And also because it's a solo build, we need to take on another role to keep us alive. In this case, we've chosen repairs, so we balance out that damage with some armor-based repair. The Chameleon is a short-range weapon with poor accuracy, so we need to stay in close range. Because we are playing at close range, we use armor and a shield to give us a lot of effective health pool because we are in a lot of danger. Our damage is going to come from our weapon talent and minor attributes, which are the most efficient sources in those slots, and the repair is going to come from armor cores and our gear set talent. Here's the build. We are running Chameleon with crits all over our minor attributes, with Obliterate for the chest talent to give us extra damage. Foundry Bulwark and our blue core attributes are giving us a ridiculously strong shield with tons of repairs. Memento is giving us lots of bonus armor and armor regen to help our repair, and the extra weapon damage is supplementing the weapon damage we're losing by going blue cores. And we can see here, even just by our stats distribution, just like our flowchart, we have lots of blue attributes and lots of red attributes. We aren't spreading ourselves too thin by also investing in repair skills or stats effects or some other silliness. Now let's think about after we tested this build and what I thought of it. We have tons of repair, more so than we really need because we were never really in danger of going down. That's the point of this build, to be able to play casually without really having to worry. Do we need more damage? We don't need more damage, but we can put more on, and if we can, we should try putting more damage on to see if we can further refine the build. In this instance, we're already maxed out on crit basically, so we could try adding more weapon damage cores, or we could change our gear set altogether to get more damage. Something like Striker or Negotiators would give us a huge boost in damage. On to our next example, the Succubus Build. This is another solo build. This time, instead of balancing damage and repairs, we're balancing damage and crowd control. So that's step 1. We're pretty squishy and relying on the crowd control to keep the enemy from shooting us. That means we want to play a little farther back, and we have a weapon that can engage at that distance. In this case, that means a rifle, LMG, or AR. We're getting amplified damage through the ongoing directive set, as well as additional damage from its chest piece and from the Sadist weapon talent. We've got crowd control with the Courier backpack, which allows us to spread our riot foam or blinder firefly every 10 seconds. How might we be able to refine this build to work for us? Well, if we need our stats effects to last longer, we can put on more stats effects attributes or skill tiers. If we need more damage and don't need the stats effects nearly as much, we can swap the backpack talent for Wicked. Next, let's look at where agents can go wrong in their builds when they don't use this method and correlate these to each step. Following each step will help us catch and avoid these mistakes to have better builds. If we try to do repairs and crowd control and damage, then we get repairs that aren't sufficient, or crowd control that doesn't control effectively, or damage that is too weak. Our method here clearly shows us on the flowchart. We're picking too many roles. An issue that we might catch at step 2 includes using a weapon that isn't correlated to the right range. MMRs aren't ideal for close range, and a pistol is much better suited to this role. Having a shotgun at long range obviously just doesn't make sense. Step 3 helps make sure that our stats are aligned with our outline from step 1, as well as helping us pick the most powerful pieces for each slot. If we have a repair skills based build, there's no point in running ongoing directive, which is a status based set. We can also avoid low value talents like unbreakable and reassigned. Step 4 helps us further refine our builds and check all the previous steps, as well as making sure our theoretical ideas actually translate to in-game performance. Something as simple as making sure our talents are activating properly can be an issue. Once on legendary capital building, I wasn't having Heartbreaker stack correctly because the enemies were out of the range of the link laser pointer that I was using to pulse. Because I wasn't getting the enemies pulsed, I wasn't getting stacks for Heartbreaker, and that was a big deal for that build. It just wasn't working. This step helps us check to make sure that everything that we assume is going to happen actually happens in game. This method not only helps us with our own builds, but for other builds that just aren't working for us. For example, many of us have seen this meta striker build. 4-piece striker with the striker backpack, Coyote's mask, Cheska obliterate chest, and a shield. This might be too squishy for some players. I've seen this question asked more times than I can count on Reddit. So what do? Well, we see we need some more repairs, because we're too squishy. We've got a shield. So what synergizes with that? Let's go to step 3. We can easily recalibrate some core attributes to armor cores to buff ourselves and our shield. Or we can drop the Coyote's mask and replace it with a striker piece, and then put in the nimble holster, memento, or Exodus gloves for a very lightweight, efficient swap that can skyrocket the amount of repair that we get. Doing this exact swap is what allowed me to clear Legendary District Union Arena solo for the first time. Alright, so that covers the Dispatch Build Making Method, or DBMM. Remember the 4 steps. Use the build outline flowchart, determine the engagement distance, choose efficient pieces, and then test and refine. These steps will empower us to stretch our creativity while excelling on the battlefield. Remember to like, subscribe, and put your thoughts in the comments. All feedback is welcome. Check out our builds playlist for some of the banger builds I've used this method on. Alright, that concludes this training module. Thanks for learning with me, agents, and until next time, this has been Dispatch. Take care out there.